Good evening, everyone. As a premier University of African scholarship, UKZN and in particular, the Graduate School of Business and Leadership, we are very honored to host this evening's webinar titled Remodeling Local Economic Development in KwaZulu-Natal, Promoting Efficient Administration, Good Governance, Agile Leadership, and a Conducive Business Environment. As our country develops, good governance and efficient bureaucracy will play an important role in creating conducive business environment. The theme of an autonomous, efficient, and effective bureaucracy will feature prominently in our dialogue as a nation. It is thus our responsibility in academia, business community, as well as in government to coordinate and continue to converse about these issues, which have to bring about the change in our system and chart a way forward into the future. With these brief words, I would like to welcome you to this evening's webinar featuring two eminent speakers. I hope you will imbibe on their knowledge and have your minds poked by the deliberations we are about to have. So thank you very much for coming. I'll then cede to Mr. Zikali to introduce our guest speakers for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. My name is Bonelo Africa Zikali from Umtubatuba local municipality. Well, today I'm a student at the University of Zululand, postgraduate diploma in local economic development. My task is very easy, but it is also very important that I introduce myself and my history. Well, I hold a BA in Development Studies from the University of Zululand. I hold honors in Development Studies. I hold masters in Development Studies. Currently, I'm studying postgraduate diploma in local economic development. Well, in my master's, I was specializing in women participation in local economic development, which makes it gender and development. Well, I will start by introducing Dr. Tumi Nkosha. I've read her profile. There's a very, very serious profile. Both guests are well educated. They are profound, they are prolific, and I know that we will gain a lot today as the class of 2023 and as someone who comes from the municipality as well. So I'm wearing two hats. I will be gaining from the class and I will also gain the knowledge that I will then apply in my local municipality. So, well, Dr. Tumi is a Deputy Director in Local Economic Development at Eastern Cape Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, which is abbreviated as COGTA. And she is also a professional and a research local economic development specialist with over 5 years of local economic development experience in both the public and the private sector. Her educational history courses. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of Fort Hare, a Master of Philosophy in Development Finance from Stellenbosch. He also holds BCom honors in economics from Stellenbosch, BCom in economics, finance, and statistics from UCT, or at the University of Cape Town. She is an active member of economic development in Southern Africa. Her research interest includes inclusive growth and development, educational economics, public policy, and she has a number of publications in the fields that I've mentioned. Then without any further waste of time, I'll just say what exactly will she be addressing today. She will be addressing or rather the topic that says creating a conducive business environment, investment, economic and growth, amongst other topics that she will cover. Then I will shoot straight to Professor Kambule. Well, when you talk of when you are an associate professor, it means that you have deep knowledge in terms of what you are specializing in, because there is an assistant professor, there is senior professor, then there is associate professor. So I think we have we are privileged today to have these two guests. Well, I think I'll just go to the educational history because I think time is against me. Well, Professor Kambule studied Bachelor of Social Science, Philosophy and Political Science at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, BA Honors, Philosophy, Politics and Economics, University of Cape Town, BCom, Regional and Local Economic Development, University of UKZN, PhD or the Doctor of Philosophy in Development Studies from the University of UKZN. And I think I'm coming for that in 2025. I'll be doing my PhD at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. So now I see who is going to be my mentor or my course supervisor. And then I think because his profile is very deep, I'll just highlight a few things going to the research output. He has published 27 articles or journals. So he is specializing in political economics, to be precise. So he has a book, he's written chapters, he has supervised 8 candidates. There is a lot that one can indicate, but I know that they will introduce themselves before starting the presentations. I hope I did my best. We are expecting a lot from you. We are expecting a lot of information regarding local economic development, the challenges, the solutions. We are expecting a lot, and we are grateful and honored that we will be people who will be listening to you, or the attendees in this very serious meeting or webinar, because we need to gain a lot. We are still learning when it comes to local economic development. And one day we wish to be specialists in local economic development. So having people who have in-depth knowledge when it comes to local economic development, we are privileged. So thank you very much. We are looking forward to interact, to gain knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Zikali. I think that we will then start and move to our first speaker for the day, Professor Kambule. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Do I need to have my video on?
It might be better, Prof. Yes, it might be better, Prof. Thanks.
Okay, no, thank you so much, colleagues, for the invitation to a particular university that I hold dear at heart, university that I worked for, I think, for 4 years before I left. And I must also thank the colleagues at the Graduate School of Business and Leadership, of where I also attained my master's. And most importantly, again, I must also thank everyone who is attending this particular webinar, which is discussing an important issue in the context of KwaZulu-Natal. Of course, as we know, KwaZulu-Natal has some of the highest poverty rates in the country. Again, in addition to provinces such as Mpumalanga and Northern Cape, and in terms of high unemployment rates as well. And we also see this playing itself out in terms of uneven development, as well as spatial inequalities that we mostly see between your coastal municipalities and as well as your inland municipalities. And the particular topic for today's webinar is remodeling local economic development in KwaZulu-Natal, with a particular focus on promoting efficient administration, good governance, agile leadership, a conducive environment for businesses. And those are fundamentally important aspects to making local economic development work. But the first particular question that we need to ask ourselves is, why do we need to remodel local economic development in its entirety, and how we have been understanding it in the South African context? So if we go to the National LED framework, which was published in 2018, and it will guide local economic development planning between 2018 up to 2028, we'd realize that a number of challenges were cited by the report, such as and issues are basically as the lack of understanding of what local economic development is within municipalities. There are issues that are related to the lack of integrated sector plans for local economic development. And we need to understand that's a highly specialized skill in terms of developing sector plans, in terms of clustering your economies and ensuring that there's sufficient support. And in addition to that, there's also issues linked to limited funding. Access to finance is one of the fundamental tools to making local economic development work. And as we understand, South Africa has some of the highest startup rate failures globally, of which goes up to between 70 to 80% of new SMMEs failing to sustain themselves or failing to even go beyond the second year. And lastly, again, issues that are related to uncoordinated projects. And this is fundamentally so because if you take a municipal focus in terms of understanding local economic development, the focus has been mainly on projects that are done by municipalities, rather than having an integrated approach that is going to focus on what small businesses are bringing into the table, what investment is available, and how to ensure that there is coordination between institutions that support local economic development and as well as investors. And in this particular case, I would like to basically share a presentation that I have prepared. So before I go on, so I'm affiliated to the University of the Witwatersrand at the Wits School of Governance, where I am an associate professor. And I also work for Allen and Jill Gray Philanthropies, of which is a particular entity of Allen Gray that is focusing on improving the entrepreneurial ecosystem in South Africa. And you'll realize that recently, whenever we are talking about local economic development, there has been an emergence of the term called entrepreneurship ecosystem, because local economies occur in an ecosystem. And that's a particular focus that we have not necessarily focused on within the South African landscape in terms of local economic development strategies. And again, if we look at some of the failures of LED in the South African context, they're mainly related to issues that are facing capacity issues, institutional factors. But we also know, again, that we recently adopted what we call the professionalization framework. And some of the important questions that have been asked then is, how would this particular framework help us in terms of improving institutional capacities within municipalities, but importantly within the local economic development space, how are we going to utilize this framework to improve capacities within the LED space? So there are those who would come and tell you that the biggest problem is that LED has always remained an unfunded mandate within municipalities. And I see that with a number of LED officials who are in this particular webinar, and they will tell you that the problem is LED is mainly not prioritized within municipalities. And they often receive what we call residual funds from municipalities because they're not a priority. So once funds are allocated to other departments and wherever funds are remaining, they'll often be allocated to the LED unit, which tells you that it is not a priority for the municipality, and it has not necessarily been a priority for COGTA as well as such, in terms of ensuring that there are sufficient funds that are dedicated to such departments. We see a number of municipalities. For example, if you look at the entire province of Northwest, I think they are sitting back to the National Treasury over 1 billion rands, of which was unspent. So if you could imagine what that amount was going to do in terms of improving local economic prospect, particularly in a province that lacks infrastructure in terms of improving its basic access to services such as water and as your electricity. And those are core to building up local economies. And in the context of KwaZulu-Natal, we also understand again that a major factor that we recently faced was the issue of the violent looting that we saw in 2020, if not 2021, and of which again led to a number of people losing their livelihoods in terms of employment, and as well as a number of businesses shutting down. So what I'll be basically presenting here in realization of the current challenges that we are facing, not only as the province of KwaZulu-Natal, but as well as from a national perspective, is something that we are currently working on with Alan and Jill Gray, and as well as one of the universities in Amsterdam, in terms of coming up with better ways of understanding local economic development, and basically doing away with the notion of just understanding LED as a municipal task, and then to a particular era whereby LED could be understood as something that everyone needs to participate in. So the first slide basically focuses on what we call a local economic development or an entrepreneurship ecosystem. So what do we mean by an entrepreneurship ecosystem, or what we probably in the South African context modify to become the local economic development ecosystem? So in an ecosystem, as we learned back then, is basically a particular environment whereby different entities exist and they help each other in terms of ensuring that a particular ecosystem can be sustainable. And in this particular case, if you are focusing on the entrepreneurship ecosystem, we are looking at a number of factors that are going to produce a healthy environment for entrepreneurship to occur, and as well as a healthy environment for local economies to prosper. And in this particular task, again, one of the key things, as you shall see in this presentation, is related to fundamentally three things. One is related to talent, and then we also have an issue of culture, and then we also have support. And if you look at these particular 10 conditions, then or elements that we have identified, we focused on issues such as your physical infrastructure, and those are your bridges, that are access to internet, access to electricity. And then we also focus on demand of the kind of businesses that are being generated in a particular region. And then we also focus on intermediaries, and those are services that exist within a particular market and the role that can be played by other players. And then we also have what we call talent. So talent basically refers to entrepreneurs or people who are within the entrepreneurship space who are trying to start their own businesses. And then knowledge also refers to key factors that are related to the kind of knowledge that we have, and whether the kind of knowledge that we have is enough or sufficient to improve our local economies. Leadership as well, you focus on key issues related to political leadership and as well as financial leadership. And then you also have finance, which is related to access to finance. And then we have formal institutions. So your formal institutions are mainly your government, your municipalities, your small business development agencies, and as well as any other regulatory institutions that play an important role in terms of designing a particular landscape for entrepreneurship to exist in that ecosystem. And if we look at culture again, we also look at the normative values that people have in terms of producing new businesses, and as well as lastly as networks. A lot of people have done studies focusing on networks or social capital. So our understanding is that if we prioritize all of these particular 10 elements, then we are likely to improve the local economic development space or the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And again, this could be a particular framework that is remodeling the existing local economic development strategies that mainly say, when we're developing an LED strategy, then we're only going to focus on the strengths and weaknesses of municipalities, but that does not necessarily do justice. So what we need is a particular framework that will be able to understand as to what is the current state of physical infrastructure in a particular municipality. For example, if physical infrastructure plays an important role as to whether people are going to invest in that municipality or not. It also plays a particular role in terms of producing economies of scale and as well as the lowering the cost of doing businesses. And that is why cities tend to be more prosperous than semi-urban or rural and urban municipalities because of the availability of physical infrastructure and as well as the economies of scale that is created by such a particular existence. And if you look at key issues again that are related to leadership, if we focus on cities such as your Cape Town as your mid-val during the tenure of Bongani Baloyi, you'd realize that institutions played or leadership played an important role in terms of the kind of environment that was created for businesses to prosper, and as well as in terms of remodeling how their economies will be structured and as well as attracting investment. And then you also focus on key issues related to access to finance. And one of the particular problems is that finance is always looked at from the side of what is the government going to provide. But there's an abundance of finance out there for small businesses. So if we can equip our LED offices to know where businesses can source funding, and not just funding that is coming from the government, but funding that is coming from the private sector, and as well as funding that is coming from philanthropies or any other non-governmental organizations. And this is also related to the key issue of knowledge. How are universities working with municipalities in terms of producing new knowledge? As we know, the University of KwaZulu-Natal has an LED program, and there is a step further to say this is how we can best support the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And just to move on to this next slide. So basically here, we explain based on the work that has been done by Eric Stem, the colleague from the university in Amsterdam, which basically tells you as to what kind of indicators do you need. So for example, if you look at formal institutions, those are the rules of the game in society that are basically implemented by the government. If you look at the entrepreneurship culture again, this is related to the degree to which entrepreneurship is being valued in a particular region. And if I was to ask a number of our LED officials that are here in terms of how is entrepreneurship valued in your particular municipality, how are you supporting those entrepreneurs? And the key issue would be we can support them in terms of the non-financial aspect because the municipality does not have sufficient fund. But then again, how do we create a system whereby we know and we can ensure that there is available finance? And again, it goes back to the particular problem of LED not being a priority or not being a key mandate for many municipalities. And as I've explained in terms of physical infrastructure and finance as well as leadership. So these are key outputs that are needed for local economic development to work. So how do we do this then? An important connotation that I will introduce is the idea of a connecting project that we are currently working on with Ellen Gray. And the idea is that it is very important for us, for number one, to understand. And what are we understanding? So we are trying to understand the context in terms of what is happening within these 10 conditions. And as I've explained, if you look at the case of one municipality in Northwest, the clover factory decided that they will move the entire factory from Northwest and particularly to KwaZulu-Natal because of issues that are related to availability of services, and those services are mainly key, such as your infrastructure. Because again, if you cannot produce the kind of infrastructure that is needed by those investors are likely to move to regions that will provide you with better infrastructure. So that is why we have infrastructure as a key priority to improving local economic development or remodeling local economic development. Because if we understand LED outside of these 10 conditions that we're presenting, then we are likely to fall into a trap of failing to understand what is making other regions prosper, whereas some regions are declining. So the idea here is that we need to be able to understand within this particular 10 conditions as to how they are in a particular municipality and how best to improve them, and whether improving them is going to improve the entrepreneurial ecosystem or the local economic development ecosystem in that particular municipality. And then again, secondly, the idea is that you can then measure through reliable data and create a measurement of as to how healthy is a particular environment in terms of its local economic development landscape. And through that, you are doing something that is new, that says, let me use data to plan for local economic development. Let me use data to gauge as to how I compare with other municipalities. And then thirdly, again, in terms of sharing again. So what you do is, through the data that you gather, you design probably an LED framework that says, we must also have a platform of evidence-based research that is going to give us all the key insights in terms of the health of our ecosystem. So once you have done this, through particularly measuring and sharing, then you are able to go to your budget whenever the municipality wants to present its budget and say, this is the health of the local economic development ecosystem in KwaDukuza if it's KwaDukuza, Umdoni if it's Umdoni. And based on the funding provision or the budget that we have, we feel that we need to be prioritizing certain elements. And that on its own is an integrated approach, because physical infrastructure lies in a particular office that deals with technical services. And that's an office on its own. So then you are able to ensure that LED is integrated into the planning measures that are made by each and every of these particular offices. And then lastly, again, as an important element, it is the idea of ensuring that you connect the ecosystem players. This has been probably the notion that was supposed to be played by, or the idea of this particular model through local economic development agencies. And one of the fundamental questions that we often have, has it been successful in a particular environment whereby there is still confusion between what local economic development units are doing and what local economic development agencies are doing? And I believe that Dr. Tumi, once she touches on this, I think she's well aware of the cases in the Eastern Cape. Even now, COGTA has plans whereby I think they've roped in the University of Fort Hare to assist local economic development agencies. And that on its own speaks to a core issue of co-creation, whereby you are utilizing the knowledge that exists within universities to improve the functioning of a particular entity of a municipality. And in this particular context, colleagues, as I end it, the idea is that through the connecting, or what we call the entrepreneurship ecosystem, of which we hope to remodel as the local economic development ecosystem, we'll be able to say municipalities, in terms of modeling your local economic development strategies, here is a measure, or here is a new strategy that you can actually utilize, or here's a new approach that you can use in terms of affecting your local economic development strategy, and say, focus on these particular 10 conditions, be able to tell your municipality and get all the data that you need to show that these are the 10 conditions, and this is how we have measured them, and this is how we can improve them in order for us to ensure that local economic development is going to prosper. And particularly in the case of KwaZulu-Natal, as we understand that there's a mixture of your rural municipalities as well as your semi-urban and one metro. we understand that it is very key in that particular municipality to ensure that there is going to be an even distribution of physical infrastructure, because municipalities that are lagging behind are not necessarily going to catch up without the kind of infrastructure that you need. If you go to former industrial towns such as Mandeni, you'll realize that they've been on the decline. There are certain parts of Newcastle that were also former industrial towns, but they've been on the decline. And the one common denominator is that infrastructure, and as well as access to finance in those particular areas, has been on the decline. So basically, in a nutshell, I'm proposing that in terms of remodeling local economic development, we look at this idea of a local economic development ecosystem through the 10 conditions that we have presented. And from them, then we'll be able to develop LED strategies that are going to respond to context that we find in our respective municipalities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I hope everyone is jotting down their comments and questions because we are now moving to Dr. Nkosha for her presentation. Please start, Dr. Nkosha. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Am I audible? Oh, can you see me?
Yes, you are audible, Doc.
I've got my computer. Oh, good evening, colleagues. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Chair. I'd like to apologize that I'm using my phone. My computer is actually not working. So I will ask Dr. Barcelo to actually go through the slides. But I think before I start my presentation, I've already been introduced. I'm Uvilo Nkosha. I work for COGTA as a deputy director, and I had the privilege of acting as an acting director for a period of 6 months. And I think that's where my interest for local economic development started, and also the remodel of local economic development. And I think I just need to give this background. One of the tasks that were given by the Eastern Cape Portfolio Committee was that they are tired of all these plans, all these strategies that are being developed, and nice strategies that are being developed, but then there are no economic spin-offs. And we're tasked that we really need to work together with UDIDID, the Department of Economic Affairs, to make sure that we remodel local economic development in the Eastern Cape. And I think one of the things that we were tasked to do was to make sure that we conduct a research on effectiveness of the local economic development agency. And I must say that I'm very proud and very happy to be sharing a stage with someone that I've read quite a lot of literature in terms of local economic development agencies. And I think when we were doing the proposal for this, he's written, Prof. Kambule has written quite a lot. And I even said to Dr. Yalezo that I would actually like to meet Dr. Kambule, which he's mentioned quite a lot of things that are going wrong in terms of these local economic development agencies that were supposed to be supporting municipalities in terms of driving local economic development. I mean, one of the key issues it's not just coming from Prof. Kambule, and also other scholars are saying that the main problem is in the sustainability of the funding model. So where now the parent municipality funds these LED agencies, and apparently there are different types of agencies. They have been evolving. I think the last ones was those that were developed by the model that was developed by IDC. And I think for me, one of the key things that I saw, and I think it was a big challenge in terms of local economic development, as I was, acting director, was the information gap. And also the fact that I think Dr. Kambule has mentioned quite a lot of things that I would be, saying, the fact that, well, firstly, to understand the ecosystem, right? And to understand the players, and mainly the fact that, LED is seen as an unfunded mandate, and also LED is really not a priority. I think for our department, when I first joined the department in 2018, apparently before my tenure, the department had funding that it used to assist municipalities in terms of implementing projects. But now we have no funding whatsoever. And for me was that, how do we remodel and make sure that we are relevant in the space? Can you just, go down, Marcelo? I'm not gonna go through, but I just wanted to go through to the concept. I think for me, Prof. Kambule has already said it again. It's in the understanding of, local economic development. There are various definitions of local economic development. And I think for me, the one that resonates with me is the one that talks about, it's the process of, working together with the private sector, public sector, and communities in order to make sure that there is creation of employment and economic growth. And I think also the World Bank does touch on that. And can you put it on slide on? Yes, thank you, Marcelo, Doc. And I think also we know that in terms of that, we want to make sure that there is poverty reduction, in terms creation of employment. And I think with the province like the Eastern Cape and the KZN, we have high unemployment rates, high poverty rates, and high inequality. And I think the LED tool was used to actually do that. I think, can you go down? I'm actually not gonna go down. I'm not gonna go through the legislative mandate of LED. And I think I just wanted to look at the two approaches of LED, which is the pro-poor approach. Can you go down, Doc? I'm not gonna go through the yes and all this legislative mandate, but I think I'll just start here with the national. Can you just go up with the national framework, which Professor has already touched on the national framework, which has about, I think, 6 pillars and also has enablers. Can you just go down a bit? If you're looking at the national framework, we've got, to build a diverse and innovative local economies, and also developing inclusive economies, and also developing learning and skills economies. And I think economic governance and infrastructure. I think Prof has already spoken about the importance of infrastructure within LED. And I think when you spoke, he did say that the LED should be in that planning unit, and also knows exactly what type of infrastructure this municipality has. And you can see that the key enablers, which is one of the key things that we are beginning to do in the Eastern Cape, is to make sure that we take the monitoring and evaluation of all the 39 municipalities to understand the project that they're doing, to give us the progress on the implementation, so that we can see that whatever that they're implementing, it's what is on the strategy and what are the key challenges, and also to make sure that we'll report on that, and also make sure that we'll report that to the MM and the councillors to say that, look, this is what's happening. And we also report that through clusters, and also make sure that we will report to DCOC, because they've got international partners that they work with. Also, funding is one of the key challenges within implementing the LED strategies. As we assess the LED part in the IDP, and also looking at the Section 147 reports, and you will see that the budget that is given to municipalities is non-existent. Same as the department, which is COGTA. The budget that we have is actually, it's just for operating and just to provide technical assistance to municipalities. And also the capacity development. One of the things that we've done in the Eastern Cape is to partner with CEDA and also SALGA to make sure that we capacitate our municipalities, and as well we capacitate the SMMEs. And also one of the things that we want to do now is to make sure that we capacitate the informal sector, so that they move from being informal sector to the formal sector. And also the planning and research, where Dr. Prof. Kambule has already said that when we were given this task of making sure that we assess the effectiveness mandate of the local economic development agencies, we thought that which universities that can assist us, and we approached University of Fort Hare, where we've got a 3-year contract where we'll be looking at the effectiveness of the mandate of local economic development agencies in the Eastern Cape. Can you just also go down? I think I've already touched on this, the partnership. I think for me, and I said that one of the key things, definition that resonated with me, and also I always talk about when I'm doing, when I'm doing the capacity building with councillors, or doing capacity building within municipalities, it's the importance of partnership, because as government, we cannot do the local economic development alone. We need to bring private sector on board, and I think that's why the importance of partnership for me. I think in terms of us remodeling, especially as COGTA not having the finances to support municipalities in terms of making sure that they implement their LED strategies. The importance of partnerships, and I think I'll make an example. We are what we've done. We wrote to the Mining Development Agency, where we're asking the Mining Development Agency to give us their economic plans in terms of the areas that are labor sending areas within the municipality. And Usibanye we've got a project. I think this week we're doing a series of meetings with Usibanye ICRDA in terms of cannabis project, where we are bringing in private sector to say that can you give back to these labor sending municipalities. So that's why I'm saying that it is key that private partnership, the PPP, the triple P, it is important in terms of driving the local economic development. And so can you just go down, Marcelo, again? And I think for me, the South African government had adopted the pro-poor approach. There are two approaches in LED, which is the pro-growth and the pro-poor approach. And I think the pro-poor approach is an approach that is focusing on alleviation of poverty. As you all know that we've got this triple challenge where we have high unemployment and high poverty rates. And then there's also I think for developing countries like South Africa, the pro-poor LED implementation supports and enables local stakeholders to empower the poor to gain access to and take advantage of economic activities, and helps the poor to become entrepreneurs. Can you go down again? And the pro-growth, it's improving local economies, and also making sure that the SMMEs are self-reliant, entrepreneurship, expansion of market, and competitiveness. Yes, there are these two different. For me, I keep saying that one of the things that we can do in terms of us, taking the pro-poor approach, we can integrate the two approaches, which is the pro-growth approach and the pro-poor approach, because the pro-poor approach that we've been using has not been working because the money is derived from government. Once these projects that the municipalities are implementing, when government pulls out the funding, those projects don't have a result, don't have good results. So I think for me, one of the remodel is to make sure that we adopt the two approaches. And of course, Eastern Cape and KZN are the same. We are mainly 70% of the population is mainly rural. So we cannot run away from the pro-poor approach, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we also prioritize the pro-growth approach, where we're making sure that we assist our SMMEs so that they are able to assist us in the pro-poor approach. Can you just go up again? I think, no, go down, sorry. I've already touched on that, where I'm saying that both concept of pro-poor and the pro-growth need to be addressed as an integrated LED approach. A pro-growth policy could be equated to creating an enabling environment, and the two main approaches to LED should include corporate center approach. Can you please go down again? Sorry, can you go down again? I think one of the current challenges on integrated approach within the public sector, but I think Prof has touched on some of the things that I'm going to say. It's a lack of shared conceptual understanding of what LED is within the public space. We've got Didit, we've got Dr. Da, and other entities, but there is a lack of shared conceptual understanding. And I think we need to go back to the drawing board, where we make sure that the approach that we are using is the same, and the language that we talk in terms of LED that we bring to municipalities is the same. Also, some of the departments will lack capacity and lack resources and produce strategic plans that are not updated. The plans that they tend to be very disconnected from reality. And I think we really need to do something. I think one of the key challenges that happens is that most municipalities, they outsource the review or the development of local LED strategies, which becomes a problem that strategy doesn't become implementable and they do not understand it. I think one of the approaches that we do is to make sure that we develop those LED or review of those LED strategies in-house, and also bring different players and bring different government departments, so that they can also learn in terms of how to review an LED strategy. And I keep saying one of the mistakes that we normally do in terms of this reviewing of LED strategy, we always think that we need to start afresh. It's not about that. And I keep saying that the first thing that you must tell us in the previous LED strategies, the programs that you have adopted, what have they done? Have you completed them? What are the challenges? So that when we are, the whole point of reviewing is one, to check whether those programs were able to change the situation on the ground, because we didn't just adopt those programs, we adopted those programs because the SWOT analysis that was done through the different analysis that were done showed us that we really need to adopt this program and that program that will make sure that there is a change. But what you see in many instances, they start all over the process. I mean, a 5-year, it's a medium term, and some of these programs, they will take time to make sure that you see the impact. And also the private sector is also not aligned with the municipality and economic analysis intelligence. So that's also, we also need to bring the private sector on board in terms of local economic development. And I think one of also the key challenges, also Prof mentioned that, you know, when you read a lot of literature, it talks about it's an unfunded mandate, and that when you see in terms of budget, and it's really budgeted, and there's limited funding and financing for these LED programs. So it is a challenge, and also it's really not a priority for government, and yet they always complain that we don't see anything in terms of what LED does, but there's no budget to make sure that we drive and we're able to implement these projects. And I think another thing is that it's a lack of integration of the sectoral plans as part of LED planning and implementation. I think the national government has entered into social compact with the private sectors and organized labor on various sectoral industrial master plans for the country, but do we cascade those down to local municipalities? And I think also that for me, it's something that we need to look at. Can you, yes. And I think also the lack of effective leadership within municipality has been a challenge for LED. But if we would have, you know, effective leadership in terms, you know, of the people that are being elected to for service delivery, it will have a success on our LED. I think LED has been interpreted in different ways, and I've already mentioned that it has been interpreted, and I think as the South Africans, we perhaps need to have one understanding of what local economic development is. Can you go down again? For me, I think one of the things in terms of remodeling, and that's what we have started doing, and I think I did mention at the beginning, it's to make sure that in terms of partnership, we partner with the development finance institution, we partner with all the departments that has an LED mandate, we partner with all the entities that has an LED mandate, and also we become part of those committees where they assess the applications. Because one of the challenges that I've seen is that their application requirements are too high, and you'll see that, you know, in terms of funding, the metros, the funding is concentrated on the two metros in the Eastern Cape, which is the BCM and the Nelson Mandela, and all the other municipalities do not get the funding because of non-compliance. I think it's us policymakers at times where we think that a policy is a blanket approach. A policy is never a blanket approach. We need to understand, the dynamics of our economy and make sure whatever policy we are implementing in that space, we try and make sure that, it does, talk to our people. And I think that, well, I'm talking about that institutional arrangement where we're bringing all these different players that can assist SMMEs. The reason I'm saying that, and also to say that in terms of remodeling, also we forget the traditional leadership in bringing them in terms of LED, also in making sure that they attend our forums, they understand what local economic development is, because at some point when we have developers that want to develop a certain area, agreements, they get done, but towards the end, the land is for traditional leadership, and yet they were not consulted at the beginning, and that project doesn't go anywhere. I think it's one of the things that we really need to look into, which we've been working as COPTA, working very closely with the traditional leadership. I think we've got a project that we are doing with the Mbodla, where we are trying to make sure that there is some economic activity that's happening within the rural space, because what we see that there is influx of people moving from rural spaces to urban. And if there was some economic activities that are happening within those rural spaces, we were not going to have the challenge that we are having. And it's in that project, we are also calling, making sure that we knock on different institutions where they can assist us with business plan, and also make sure that we go on different departments or institutions where funding can be accessed, in terms of making sure that we have embodied tourism within the Mala Traditional Council. Can you go down? I think I've touched on some of these things where that municipalities should be working with the private sector. We should bring private sector, as I've already said at the beginning of this, that private sector, we've brought in the mining, and we still want to continue and bring other players, so that we don't rely on the fiscus that has been declining. So for me, I think one of the things that we are still working on, and I think Prof. Kambule has talked about the ecosystem for local economic development. I think this is the ecosystem that we're trying to understand, and trying to make sure that we've got all these different, I can't see it properly. I just wanted to open it here so that I can go through it. Is that we think that a municipality alone will be able to do this. But I think we also have that thing where we're saying that the development agencies, they are supposed to be assisting municipalities. I think if we can understand all the different players in terms of who brings what, then we'll be able to make sure that we will be able to, we'll be able to make sure that we try and achieve the goal of making sure that there is conducive environment for creation of employment and economic growth. I mean, the structure to support the regional development, and there's also proximity infrastructure for the entrepreneurs, which is UPROF has talked about the importance of infrastructure. And this is exactly the point I was raising in one of the meetings for the Eastern Seaboard, that we can't leave LED out. We should be also including the LED project, even though that they are not high impact or catalytic project, because as you look at the definition of catalytic projects, when you look at the projects that LED we implement, it doesn't fit. But if we're able to package these projects and make sure that we go on different funding institutions and say that we've got these package project, what can you do? I think for e-development finance. And I think also regional and systems, there are grants, there are loans. I mean, there is a red fund where we can assist this municipality, especially those that are in the rural. We really need to assist and perhaps make sure that we look at the requirements, because what cuts a lot of people out from getting this funding, it is the requirements that are too high. And also to make sure that as local economic development, we work with these different agencies so that we will run workshops in terms of understanding the guidelines. I think last year we got guidelines of the Dirison funding that IDC took out, and we called IDC to come and also give a virtual presentation in terms of this application, but they couldn't do that for us, and it meant that Eastern Cape is not going to be able to apply. And when you even look at their annual reports, Eastern Cape doesn't get the share of the funding. I think it's because all these things are there and then they do not cascade down to those people that really, really need it. And I think because Eastern Cape and KZN, are the same, so that's a challenge. There is a challenge of gap information that doesn't go then. Also, there was a CHAP funding. Also, the same question that I was posing to the CEDA, that are you speaking to the traditional leaders in terms of this CHAP funding so that our people can, access this fund? No, all these things, they happen at an urban area. We continue to forget the rural areas, whereas there should be economic activity that's happening there, where there is some rural economic development that's happening. So also, what are the resources as the municipality now, saying that we really need to map out the resources that we have and what are the comparative and competitive advantage, and still our municipalities, when you look at their IDPs and when you're assessing that part where you are asking what's your comparative and competitive advantage as compared to the other municipalities, whether it's your economic infrastructure, whether it's the dams that you have, that those resources are not mapped out. They don't understand that, even having 2 hospitals in one municipality as compared to other municipalities, in the same area, you've got a comparative advantage. And I think also, we've talked about the basic infrastructure that's needed, and so that we are able to make sure that we are able to drive local economic development in our spaces. And I think I quite liked what the Prof said, also to bringing, the institutions of higher learning, they must also assist us in terms of research. And I think when you look at the national framework, the importance of bringing those institutions, and already we've got a partnership with the Investor Forte, where we are looking to do some work, some work with them. And I think that's all that I wanted to say in terms of remodeling local economic development in KZN. I think I've already said all these things. Thank you.
Thank you deeply, Dr. Nkosha, and thank you as well to Professor Kambule for those very insightful remarks on remodeling local economic development. So thank you very much, colleagues. We will then move on to our interactive session without wasting any time. Please raise your hands. I see that there's one or two questions already in our chat session. So I think that maybe if you can begin with those questions that are from Mr. Themba Ndlovu as well as Kubo Jamini. And then we will take hands. I don't see any hands here currently, but if you have, okay, there is one from Tanda. There is one from Tanda. So maybe you can begin, and then we have Prof. Mashao and Dr. Ntuli as well. So we do have questions. So perhaps we can start with Tanda and then move on to Dr. Ntuli with the questions. And then we'll combine those with the ones that are in the chat when we answer this with form our first round of questions. Thank you.
Good evening, colleagues, and good evening, Prof. Thank you very much for the insightful presentations that you have shared with us. My name is Tandaza. I am from the Department of Traditional Affairs, and which is a TAR within the COCTA family, based in Pretoria, and one is dealing with institutional development and coordination within the department. I'm glad that we are engaging in this manner, and I just want to make a few comments, and I think perhaps at the end of the day, colleagues might even make inputs, those who are in attendance. Yes, LED is in the municipal space, and like Dr. Kotla has indicated, within that space we have traditional communities. And one advantage that traditional leaders have is land, as they are somehow custodians of land. In terms of development initiatives, we tend to ignore them and don't include them in our planning, and yet there's a lot that could be done in those respective areas. I just want to indicate that as a department, through the National House of Traditional Leaders, there is an Invest Rural Master Plan that has been developed, and that Invest Rural Master Plan, the aim is to it gives attention. The focus is on traditional communities, where we are ensuring that there is we're promoting rural economy, and as indicated by Dr. Nkotla in her presentation, we have got a lot of private companies that are operating in some of those areas. And it is important that when traditional or municipalities are putting together that LED framework, it would be important that we bring those private businesses or companies together. Right now, we may all be aware that there is this DDM approach that is being that was initiated in 2019. That would be another approach that probably could be utilized. It's just that sometimes as officials and as government officials, we may not necessarily have a forum or a platform where we share ideas and ensure that there is an integrated approach in looking at LED. The Invest Rural Master Plan that I'm talking about has got various sectors, you know, around issues of renewable energy, telecommunication, agriculture, tourism, rural enterprise development. All those sectors, they are part of the Invest Rural Master Plan. And in our LG Summit, Local Government Summit last year, this plan was presented and municipalities were requested to make sure that there is some integration of Invest Rural Master Plan into their LED plans and LED strategies, so that we realize the impact that all these initiatives have. It is correct, I think it was between Prof. Tambula and Dr. that they indicated that we keep on producing these plans, which are very good, but the implementation thereof is very little. So I would strongly advocate for the fact that when we're dealing with LEDs in municipalities, let us not forget to incorporate that, but also to involve traditional leaders. We do have traditional departments or officials dealing with traditional affairs in various provinces. You can also bring them on board, but if maybe you are unable to do so, we are at the national level, Department of Traditional Affairs, we are available to kind of engage with you on those issues. We have got a legislation also that is talking about partnerships and agreements in traditional communities. And this legislation is Traditional and Khoisan Leadership Act. And there is a section, which is section 24, that talks about those things. And they're talking about mining companies that are operating in those areas. Mining companies have got a lot of money that they would like to utilize in those respective places. But municipalities also, they've got a role to play in ensuring that the SLPs are there and they cater for the needs of the community. So there has to be a process where we are decisive and intentional about engagement with the mining companies. So I thought, Chairperson, I should just make those comments. in terms of LED in traditional communities and what we have as a department, and see how that can be integrated. We understand that not everything can form part of the plan, but it would be important that those municipalities in those areas, they can identify their endowments and capitalize on that, because there are various aspects of areas that are covered in that Invest Rural Master Plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much for that, Tandaza. I think it was quite a mouthful. Our speakers will have a chance to respond to it. Colleagues, please keep it short and sweet, because we don't have much time left, because we want our colleagues to respond thoroughly to our comments and questions. But thank you so much, Tandaza, for that. Baba Unduli, you have the next point to make. We can't really hear you. I don't know if you are muted or. Okay, in the absence of
Question has been covered.
Oh, okay, that is brilliant then. All right, thank you so much. So I think that we will just sit on to our colleagues, Dr. Bosha, as well as Professor Kambule, to respond to the question, as well as some of the questions that were posed in the chat. There are two questions there by Gajeni and Boazamin. So please respond to those as well. Thank you. Prof. Kambule.
Thank you, Dr. Vilakazi. Do I still need to have my video on?
Yes, please.
Okay, noted. Okay. Okay, no, thank you for the questions. And I think I'll start with the input that was made by Tandaza from Traditional Affairs. I mean, you've covered quite a mouthful. And most importantly, in terms of my summary of it, it's just this idea of strengthening institutional arrangements. And currently, I think there's a workshop in Limpopo, which is mainly focusing on the relationship between ward councillors, the LED community, and as well as traditional leaders. Because in most cases, the traditional leaders felt that they were not necessarily integrated into what was being done for LED, and that they were mainly bypassed by ward councillors. So there's currently a workshop that is there focusing on addressing some of those fragmentations within the landscape. And quite rightly so, if we are able to ensure that each and every stakeholder knows the role that they're supposed to play within this particular entrepreneurship or local economic development ecosystem, then we are likely to strengthen the role that is played by institutions, and as well as improve institutional focus. Then I'm going to move on to a question that was asked by Themba Ndlovu in terms of assisting municipalities access funding for resuscitating aging infrastructure. I mean, that's a very important question. Do municipalities have the capacity? Normally, municipalities receive money for the municipal infrastructure grant. And those particular funds are supposed to be spent on improving or maintaining infrastructure. And I know that Dr. Nkotla mentioned that municipalities are underfunded. But on my side, one of the fundamental challenges that we are facing is, we will say, basically from the Division of Revenue Bill, I believe that the national government gets roughly 48 to 49%, and then your provincial governments will get 48%, and then your municipalities will only get 6 to 9% or so of the national fiscus. While we understand that municipalities are supposed to get a bigger share because they're responsible for service delivery on a daily basis. But a tricky part is that despite municipalities only getting 6 to 9% of the division of revenue. Municipalities continue to underspend. And as I've indicated, the municipalities in Northwest underspent by 1 billion, and that 1 billion was going back to the National Treasury. The very same thing happens in KwaZulu-Natal, the very same thing happens in Eastern Cape. And one of the fundamental challenges that I have with that is we can't be saying there's no money to provide services. I mean, even now, making the example of the Northwest. Northwest is riddled with potholes, yet they have more than 1 billion to send back to National Treasury because, again, of a key issue related to fiscal incapacity. If you're unable to plan and budget properly with the money that you have, then you are likely to send it back to National Treasury. And in this case, if you are sending 1 billion back when you know that your infrastructure is collapsing. I think it was probably a month or so ago, I had the privilege of going to Sun City. Sun City, it's supposed to be a national key point in terms of tourism. But to find that you'll have potholes driving to such a particular area of importance from an economic perspective, that on its own suggests something else. So right now, as I've mentioned, the issue of aging infrastructure, then municipalities are failing to maintain. The issue is the failure of municipalities to maintain that infrastructure because they do receive grants. There is money that goes back to the National Treasury on an annual basis, money that could be used to address some of these fundamental challenges. There are communities to this particular day that do not have tarred roads. Yet again, we have money going back to the National Treasury. And this is an issue, again, even international government level. The Department of Basic Education will also send money back to the National Treasury, knowing very well that we still have many schools that have pit toilets. And that on its own does not make sense. Why do you have pit toilets if you have a budget that you are not even spending? And I believe that we need to get to a point whereby we ask those particular important questions as to why do we have money to send back when we could be providing services using that particular money that you have or using those particular grants that you have. And in this case, in terms of it's mainly the ability of municipalities. It is not something that is only happening in your small town or rural municipalities. In Johannesburg, the very same thing is happening. If you live in Four Ways, if you live in Lone Hill or wherever it is, most of the time you do not have electricity, you do not have water because the Johannesburg Metropolitan Municipality is failing to maintain its infrastructure. It is failing to develop it. And yet again, we always argue that metropolitan municipalities always prove to have better capacity. But in this case, we need to be able to interrogate as to what is driving those failures. Are they deliberate? Because it makes no sense that you can live in a country whereby, I mean, it's basically like living in a home where your kids are going to bed hungry, whereas you have money stashed in your mattress. It makes no sense. And those are important questions that we need to be asking our leaders in terms of the commitments that they have in the various municipalities that they lead. And then again, there was also a question from Ukubobuhle Dlamini. And the question was basically focusing on how do SSMEs access finance and as well as to how they access markets and the challenges that they are facing and issues of gatekeeping. I mean, these are fundamentally important questions. And in this case, the issue of access to finance is very important. I can roughly, again, give you statistics. Even the funding that is channeled by your small business department, or even it is your small business development agency, only a handful of that money is spent on productive businesses. Most of the time, funds are allocated to businesses that are not productive, businesses that are not going to give you the kind of economic outcomes that you are looking for. And again, it goes back to the idea of actually ensuring that we have stricter measures in terms of what kind of businesses are we going to fund. And in this particular case, again, it is related to issues of gatekeeping because people know certain people that they prefer the funds to go to. I mean, we've seen this with the number of our commissions. We are recently seeing it with what was happening within the National Lotteries Commission. Because it is not necessarily the case that money or the funds or the financing goes to the most deserving businesses. It mainly goes to businesses that are well connected. And that on its own is a fundamental challenge, a mishap that is taking the country to a particular direction that we do not want to see it. And again, I mean, Dr. Vuyokotla basically mentioned a lot of key things. Some of them are related to how we are focusing on the poor budgeting process, and as well as a planning perspective in terms of local economic development. But one of the key things in terms of local economic development agencies that I was also trying to discuss with Dr. is we have local economic development agencies. And we are saying we are trying to remodel local economic development. But these local economic development agencies do not even feature on the district development model. And my question was, why are you introducing these local economic development agencies as vehicles to drive regional development or district development? And then you introduce a district development model that excludes the fundamental role that is played by local economic development agencies. And that on its own tells us that we also need to go back, even in terms of the DDM, to say what role is played by these local economic development agencies. We do not need it to be quiet, because again, if it is quiet on that, we are likely to face the similar issue whereby there's a duplication of tasks between local economic development units and as well as your local economic development agents. And that is something that you cannot afford to have. And again, there was a question from someone who's anonymous in terms of LED funding and asking if I said municipalities fund. Municipalities end up having to fund certain projects. I think that is what I was saying, that municipalities often have to fund certain projects, where it can be in the tune of 100 or 200,000, they often fund certain projects. But in this particular case, such projects can mainly be from a pro-poor perspective, and in most cases, they tend not to be as sustainable as you want them to be. So in this particular case, it is very important for municipalities to invest in creating an entrepreneurial perspective. So entrepreneurship comes in so many ways. And in this case, it is very important for us to have what we call responsible entrepreneurship, to say if we are a municipality and we say we have resources to support small businesses in our area, we must know that those small businesses are going to generate employment. We must know that those small businesses, again, are going to play a key role in terms of the local value chain in that particular municipality, in order for us to maximize our resources. And in closing, again, just to go back to what I was talking about in terms of the local economic development ecosystem, if we do not necessarily understand what is happening within a local economic development landscape, we are in trouble, because we cannot only understand it from a perspective of just strengths and weaknesses. We need a particular framework that is going to guide us. And within the National LED framework, we also have key issues that are related to innovation in local economic development. And yet, most municipalities have not necessarily taken that. We are in the digital economy now. How are municipalities ensuring that they are rating themselves for the digital economy? We have a high number of people in the informal economy. How are we supporting them to transition to the digital economy? Because quite soon, this idea of having cash on your pockets as you go is going to disappear, as people are doing everything digitally now. So how are we supporting such vulnerable sectors of the economy to progress? How are we linking up with organizations that already exist in terms of the value chain? Again, I mean, it takes something that is quite simple. If you have a VW factory, if you have whatever factory that you have in your area, you are able to talk to informal electricians or informal mechanics in your area, so that they can also be supported and formalized and be a part of assisting the work that is being done by VW or any other organization. And that is how you connect the ecosystem. And that is why, for me, the idea is that if we are likely to think within these 10 elements or conditions, we are likely to also improve them and also improve the local economic development ecosystem for betterment in this particular case in KwaZulu-Natal, in terms of how do we remodel it again. And this could be something that could be even championed by LED units and as well as your economic development agencies, in terms of understanding the very idea of a local economic development ecosystem. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Prof. Kambule, for that very good response. Dr. Nkosha, you may begin your response as well to the questions. I don't know if you are able to view, because it said that you're using your phone, but there is a question that is directed at you.
I think Prof. Kambule has actually touched on, on all the questions. And I think I'm just going to say a few. I think in terms of what Utanda, it was more of a comment than a question. And I think I was more interested in that investment rural master plan that they have. If can they please kindly share that. And I think, like I had said in my presentation, that we are really trying to make sure that we include the traditional leadership in terms of local economic development, and making sure that even in our LED forums, they become part of, part of those forums. And I think for me, I think there was a question in terms of the training that is offered. As the Eastern Cape, we've entered into a partnership with SIDA, SALGA, and COGTA, where we trained municipalities and some of the SMMEs within the OR Tambo, but it was just at a pilot phase. So we've done that for 2 consecutive quarters, and it was, I think, most of the people that attended, they quite liked the idea. And I think it's one of the things that from now moving forward, I think there is a training that I think we had an informal trade, we had an informal summit that was held in OR Tambo as well, in the Mhlonhlo region, where it came up that informal traders could not receive the funding that was meant for them. And I think the funding indeed, Prof. Kambule returned back. And then one of the things is that LED is supposed to be having different databases, a database for SMMEs by sector, and make sure that database on a quarterly basis, it is updated. There is also a database for cooperatives that on a quarterly basis, that database is also, updated. And then you've got the informal, sector database, informal sector, where that the people that are operating as informally, so that when there are these different types of funding, I think we saw that there was a gap when, a Department of Small Business, I think they did as well. They wanted a database for, for SMMEs that were affected by COVID, and the databases were not updated. And I think it's one of the things that that also needs to be done in municipalities, so that we know who is who still, what SMMEs exist, and what SMMEs, what type of, in terms of sector, what SMMEs drives this economy, the type of sector of SMMEs that drives that local economy. And then we've also got a district SMME support centers, where all municipalities, it's still on a pilot phase. It's piloted by SIDA. It's still in OR Tambo, where municipalities, SMME, informal traders on a quarterly basis, and OR Tambo district municipalities on a quarterly basis, they come together where they share information in terms of the application that are out, and also all the different products that SIDA has and what they can offer, what SIFA has, and what DTIC has as well. And yeah, we invite the development finance institution, so that we make sure that information does cascade down to those municipalities that are mainly rural. And I think in terms of the private sector, they've got a role, that corporate social responsibility where they need to make sure that they give back to the community. And I think this is what we're trying to do. We've already started with the mining company, mining. There is a mining development agency. We have written a letter to them to say that please, identify the local municipalities where you've got labor selling areas and give us your economic plans and make sure that you give back. So that's part of making sure that we are not reliant on e-plans. We're not reliant on the grant or the fiscus. And I think Usibanye, Stillwater will be making sure that there are funding for local municipalities, 2 in Alfred Nzo and 2 in OR Tambo, and those deals, the deals already, there is a plan and everything else, but it's just that our HODs and also the CEOs and the municipalities, they will sign that and also give an accountant of that project. So what we're going to be doing and what that mining company is going to offer to those municipalities. And I think that in today's meeting, they were saying that they're trying to do something different. They are tired of just giving money and not being part, and then start things at the end and then moving. Now they want to be at the center. They start with us so that they can see the the return. I think Prof talked about something very in his presentation that I'm very much interested in, the professionalism framework. If that professionalism framework can also be shared, that will be important. And also perhaps we have a session on that professionalism framework. And I think it's also something that is really missing in the public space, professionalism, and not taking the work that you are given seriously. And I think also EDDM was trying to answer some of the challenges that I had already mentioned in terms of working in silos as department. It was trying to kill that and make it, and it was also a new integrated planning model. So if it can be implemented correctly, and I think I agree with you, Prof, when you're saying that we keep forgetting these development agencies. Even us as COGTA, we keep forgetting these development agencies as we're driving local economic development. And at times, you see that the development agency and the unit, they compete with each other, which is not supposed to be the case. They're supposed to be complementing each other. So that's why we are doing these studies and seeing some of your studies that you've done in KZN, and some of these case studies that you have done, and we see where also, I think one of them was to make sure also that the local municipalities must also fund these LED strategies. So they must also fund these local economic development agency. But I think, as you had said in that paper, that also didn't work, and it ended up being the apparent municipality that fund that. And I think that's all. I'm not sure if there was a question on.
No, you've covered it, Doc. You've covered it, Doc. Thank you so much.
Okay. I think, yeah,
so
okay, then.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much, Doc, for the powerful closing remarks. Let me just take the few minutes to say thank you so much to each and every one of you colleagues for participating and for attending this webinar. But before maybe I pass the closing remarks or the word of thanks, let me just say, we as University of KwaZulu-Natal, we've been part of local economic development, and particularly with ETIA in terms of making a contribution to the local economic development in KwaZulu-Natal. And University of KwaZulu-Natal is alive to that possibility of a progressive and a remodeled local economic development. And we do have a program on local economic development, and we also have masters on local economic development. And I think Prof. Kambule knows better than any of us. Colleagues, what we experienced today was the epitome of Black excellence, Black brilliance, and the rigorness of young minds and the most educated young minds. But let me start with Prof. Isaac and say, Prof. Kambule, I think the one thing that you omitted was to say was to instruct us actually to remodel our careers. You've done very, very well. And I mean, you were just a young researcher years back, but look at you now. You are one of the experts and one of the people who is highly respected in South Africa. And we are quite inspired by your efforts and your achievements, certainly. And thank you once again for coming to University of KwaZulu-Natal and share your experiences, your expertise, and some of the perspectives that we need to follow. You are one of our best minds. Hopefully in years to come, you will actually assist municipalities on how they can attract the funding that you are talking about, which you pellucidly detailed that it is a challenge, and municipalities need to look outside of government to get better funding or to get funding. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And the ecosystem that you're talking about, I think it's a model that we need to canvas further, and certainly we can infuse it in our teaching, and certainly we will engage you further on that one. And since you now part of the experts, and since you are part of the people that have come and graced these webinars, we will certainly tap into your intellectual rigorness, and we're looking forward to hosting you once again. And thank you so much. Dr. Ngohle, this is your second time coming to University of KwaZulu-Natal. If I was the Vice Chancellor, I was going to look for a position for you, but I know Eastern Cape needs you better than us, and Eastern Cape is utilizing you certainly. But University of KwaZulu-Natal is grateful for your efforts, and thank you once again for coming to UKZN. We are available as an institution to assist with capacity building, and also we can assist in terms of that integration, and we are certainly available to share with University of Fort Hare the experiences that we've had in terms of capacitating and making it a point that we've got graduates which emerge from local economic development or with local economic development expertise. So certainly we're looking forward to engaging with you in the future and working together. And let me just brag and say we are currently in the process of doing an MOU with the Traditional Affairs, that is the National Copter, Department of Traditional Affairs, and we will be hosting a symposium very, very soon. So we are taking local economic development forward, and we are taking it very serious. And one of the things that we are looking at is to work closely with traditional leaders. So we're looking forward to working with COPTA in Eastern Cape, and certainly COPTA in KwaZulu-Natal, in making it a point that local economic development is a success in South Africa. But I will be doing injustice if I were not to thank the participants, particularly the university community, my colleagues in the school, in the UKZN, and my colleagues in the Graduate School of Business, and certainly the Dean of the school, Dr. Mlondi, who's my co-lecturer in this module of local economic development. And I certainly thank the class of 2023 in the postgraduate diploma in local economic development. But many thanks to each and every one of you colleagues, but particularly the office or the department or the office of our public relations office, the college, meaning Hazel and your team. You've always assisted us very, very much, and we are grateful for that. To each and every one of your colleagues, thank you so much for gracing this webinar. It was a success because you attended. Thank you so much, Londi, Dr. Vilakazi, for your astute program directing skills, and we are looking forward to another webinar. Once again, we hope that you will continue to support us, colleagues, and have yourselves a great night. Looking forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Have a great night. Cheers.